Georges Melies is considered to be the father of horror and monster movies. He developed almost all of the cinematic special effects used to this day. Melies gave us the first ever screen vampire in The Devil's Castle, made in 1896, which is historically the first horror film. It runs approximately 2 minutes and predates Bram Stoker's classic, which was published in 1897. He also gave us the first Faust film, The Laboratory of Mephistopheles, in 1897, and the first robot movie, Gugos and the Automaton, in 1897. Although Melies' masterpiece, A Trip to the Moon in 1902, made him famous in the United States, many of his movies, of the supernatural and fantastic, never made it to the United States until years later. Thomas Edison's Biograph Studios were the first to bring Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, written in 1818, to the screen in 1910. In this film, by the great Edwin S. Porter, the monster is created in a cauldron of blazing chemicals, which is closer to the original book than the creation of life by electricity that we're so familiar with in later productions. In 1915, Paul Wagener, a German stage actor, made a film called Der Golem, in which he starred and directed. Based on the book by Gustav Meyrink, The Golem, a Jewish folktale about a monster made of clay that is brought to life to protect Eastern European Jews from persecution. The universal Frankenstein monster creation may have had its origin from the Golem, with its stiff, lumbering walk. In the film, the monster falls in love with his master's daughter, who rejects him, thus throwing the monster into a rage, and eventually his death. Because we were at war with Germany, the film was rarely seen in the United States. In 1919, another German filmmaker, Robert Wien, made one of the most famous films of all time, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. This classic horror film uses dramatic sets, unusual angles, and dark painted shadows to suggest impending madness and evil. Dr. Caligari hypnotizes a sleepwalker to commit murder. The plot involves a twisted world of insanity, most probably based on an 11th century German folktale about a dishonest monk who uses his sleepwalking slave to do his evil bidding. The film was a great sensation and launched a new world of mad scientists and nightmarish horror movies. In the early years of the movies, motion pictures were thought of as being evil influences on the minds of their audiences, and were often denounced from pulpits across the land. In Robert Louis Stevenson's novel, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, good is able to conquer evil, a perfect story to solve the filmmaker's great dilemma. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde has been made and remade countless times over the years. The best of the crop was the 1920 version with the great actor John Barrymore, made at the Paramount Studios in Long Island. Later sound versions were made with Frederick March in 1932 and Spencer Tracy in 1941. In 1922, a vampire invaded the screen, Nosferatu, by German filmmaker Friedrich Wilhelm Murnau, loosely based on Bram Stoker's Dracula. With the copyright on Dracula still in effect, the German production company, refusing to pay royalties to the Stoker estate, made some changes to the story. They changed the title to Nosferatu, meaning the undead. The action takes place in Bremen, Germany, not in London, and in 1830, not 1890. And Count Dracula is changed to Count Orlok, with a chilling performance by Max Schreck, creeping across the screen like a zombie, with a bat-like head and hands ready to strike his next victim. F.W. Murnau's film has become a classic masterpiece with unforgettable images of pure terror. One of the greatest stars of horror, known as the Man of 1,000 Faces, was about to emerge in one of the great horror classics of all time. Lon Chaney in The Phantom of the Opera, 1925, was made by Universal Studios, which would soon become the leading studio in horror movies. The Phantom of the Opera is the story of a mutilated musician who wears a mask and lives beneath the Paris Opera. He falls in love with a young singer whom he eventually imprisons in his underground quarters. The unmasking of the Phantom is the most memorable and nightmarish image in the history of the motion picture. Created by a brilliant actor with the most distinguished career in silent films. In 1927, Chaney teamed up with director Todd Browning in the film London After Midnight, in which he played a vampire. With his bone-white face and bulging eyes, Chaney demonstrated his true mastery of the art of theatrical makeup with an equally triumphant performance of the macabre. Universal was about to film the highly successful Broadway stage version of Dracula with its greatest talent, Lon Chaney. Unfortunately, Chaney died in 1930, and Universal began a much publicized search for a replacement. Hungarian actor Bela Lugosi was starring in the stage version of Dracula in 1927, but was not Universal's first choice. With the death of Lon Chaney, Bela Lugosi got the starring role. Directed by Todd Browning, in 1931, Dracula was a sensational hit and became Universal's biggest moneymaker of the year. From the moment Lugosi appears on the screen in his black tie and tails and announces in his rich Hungarian accent,
"I am Dracula,"
there is no doubt in all the audience's minds that Bela truly is the king of the undead. And from then on, horror films became a major attraction at movie houses across the world. Bela Lugosi became a major screen star, and Universal quickly followed the successful Dracula with a new version of Frankenstein and offered the part to Lugosi. Lugosi turned down the role for various reasons, mainly because there was no speaking part. The part was then offered to a struggling British actor by the name of William Henry Pratt, who used the stage and screen name of Boris Karloff. Directed by James Whale, Frankenstein was chosen as one of the best films of 1931. Makeup artist Jack Pierce spent months developing the plan for Karloff's face. Using green paint, putty, and a costume weighing 48 pounds, it took 3 hours to get Karloff ready every morning of filming. Frankenstein made millions for Universal and created the biggest franchise in the movie history and another iconic screen image. In 1932, cameraman Karl Freund, who photographed Dracula for Universal and the Golem in Germany, turned to directing movies and teamed with Boris Karloff to make The Mummy. This new monster launched Karloff into superstardom, and from that moment on, his name became synonymous with movie horror. Jack Pierce was again commissioned to do the makeup for The Mummy, a story of an ancient Egyptian priest, Imhotep, who falls in love with a beautiful princess whom he tries to bring back to life after she dies, only to be punished by being buried alive. Centuries later, Imhotep is brought back to life and the terror begins.
Permit me to present you with the most sensational find since that of Tutankhamun.
This is very sporting of you. May I ask why?
We Egyptians are not permitted to dig up our ancient dead.
Bela Lugosi returned as a zombie master in 1932's independent production of White Zombie, one of the first zombie movies. Lugosi plays the master of the living dead who menaces a newlywed couple on a sugar plantation in Haiti. The greatest monster movie of all time is the legendary King Kong, released by RKO Pictures in 1933, directed by Marion C. Cooper, an African adventurer, and Ernst B. Schoedsack. However, it was the genius of Willis O'Brien, a special effects master, that brought King Kong to life. O'Brien began making films for Edison's Biograph Studios. Known as the wizard of stop-motion photography, he created the giant Stone Age monsters for the Lost World. In 1925, it was considered the first feature-length monster movie and the finest of the silent era. Willis O'Brien used 16-inch models for King Kong, and with stop-motion photography, he was able to capture every gesture and movement of his 50-foot gorilla, thus creating the most grotesque yet sympathetic monster in the history of the movies. King Kong took an entire year to make at a cost of $650,000, groundbreaking for that period. It still stands today as a monumental masterpiece of creative filmmaking, unequaled and never to be duplicated, even with today's advanced technology. In 1933, Universal kept director James Whale busy again with the hit The Invisible Man, adapted from a story by H.G. Wells and starring Claude Rains as an insane doctor planning to dominate the world with his invisibility by derailing trains, robbing banks, and murdering people. He returns to visibility when he's finally shot and killed. The brilliant trick photography left audiences stunned. In 1935, Universal decided it would be profitable to bring the Frankenstein monster back to life. So director James Whale and Boris Karloff teamed up again for a sequel, The Bride of Frankenstein, considered by many even better than the original. In this movie, as in the book, a companion is created for the monster, and in steps Elsa Lancaster as the bride, who will have nothing to do with her intended, thus creating another unforgettable screen image. In the same year, 1935, The Werewolf of London made its appearance with veteran stage actor Henry Hull, but it wasn't very good. However, in 1941, Universal Studios decided to try it again, and with makeup man Jack Pierce of Frankenstein fame, they created a new monster, the Wolfman, starring the son of the legendary Lon Chaney. Lon Chaney Jr. played Lawrence Talbot, a college student returning to the home of his ancestors in Transylvania, where else, only to be bitten by a werewolf, thus turning into a werewolf himself. The film was a success in no small measure to horror master co-stars Bela Lugosi and Claude Rains. In 1940, a new horror star appeared, Vincent Price, in The Invisible Man Returns. Vincent Price went on to star in countless horror movies, in 1958 and 59's classic The Fly and its sequel, The Return of the Fly. He made numerous Edgar Allan Poe films for Roger Corman in the 60s, teaming up with legendary horror star Boris Karloff and veteran character actor Peter Lorre. Price was the ultimate connoisseur, and with his wit and charm, hammed it up in many horror movies, including Schlockmeister William Castle's 1959 hits House on Haunted Hill and The Tingler.
Leave your soul so you can join me in the glories of hell.
No, never.
Let me see your face.
In 1950,